¿Qué onda, San Antonio? Welcome to the Tamal Institute, hosted by the City of San Antonio's World Heritage Office and the UNESCO Creative Cities Network. I'm Dean Hendricks, Dean of UTSA Libraries, and I'm very excited to moderate this panel, Tamales de Nuestros Antepasados, our ancestors' tamales. I'm also very excited to let all of you know that are viewing, there is going to be a cooking demo in the middle of our presentation. It will be a recipe for mushroom tamales in Chile Colorado. But before we peel the husk off the tamales, I wanted to talk about San Antonio, our beloved home city, and its designation as a creative city of gastronomy. In November of 2017, San Antonio was accepted into the UNESCO Creative Cities Network as a creative city of gastronomy. To date, there's only 36 in the entire world of creative cities of gastronomy, and only 2 in the United States. It's San Antonio and Tucson, Arizona. The application process to become a UNESCO Creative City of Gastronomy was a community-led effort that resulted in San Antonio joining this international group of cities that work together to share best practices to ensure that culture and creativity are drivers in sustainable development. As a creative city, we are committed to strengthening San Antonio's cultural legacy and influence as a confluence of cultures, as San Antonio has always been a crossroads. The Tamal Institute is a way to not only preserve and celebrate our authentic culinary heritage, but it's also an opportunity to demonstrate our diversity, our resiliency, and sustainability. We want to stay true to our roots, yet we want to be open to innovation. And I think that sums up San Antonio's culinary scene. This designation is overseen by the World Heritage Office in the city of San Antonio, and they just launched a new website, www.sacityofgastronomy.org. That's SACITYOFGASTRONOMY.org. And you can see at that website and celebrate San Antonio's unique position as a world leader in food culture. And as we are conducting this presentation, we couldn't do it without our distinguished panel members. And today I'm very excited to introduce you to a few of the people in our community that are forwarding San Antonio's reputation as a food city, an international food city. Dr. Liliana Patricia Saldana, PhD, is from Yanaguana, indigenous territory known as San Antonio, Texas, and is an associate professor of Mexican American Studies at UTSA, where she is also co-director of the Mexican American Studies Teacher Academy. That academy is the only kind in the state to offer professional development for K through 12 teachers in the field of Mexican American Studies. A very, very important initiative that Dr. Saldana is working on. Her research draws from Chicana studies, methodologies, decolonial theory, and Chicana feminist thought to examine identity and consciousness, education rights struggles, and the intersection of public celebration, coloniality, and culture. Over the past 7 years, Saldana has collaborated in a statewide organizing effort to expand Mexican American Studies education in Texas K through 12 schools. She also serves on the board of the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center, which promotes social justice through cultural arts programming and historical preservation. And you might have seen her cooking demo with Esperanza. And she's also on the board of MACRI, the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute, a new institute that is dedicated to chronicling and sharing historic and contemporary civil rights milestones. When she's not teaching or doing public scholarship, she's learning about Mesoamerican gastronomy and indigenous foodways. Inspired by her mama, who she says is the best cook she knows, and her family struggles with diabetes, Saldana created Taller Chicomecuaro. These are community-based workshops that encourage participants to reclaim and preserve ancestral foodways for personal and collective well-being. Thank you for being here, Dr. Saldana. Our next panelist is Christina Bae. She is the executive director of the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center. Under her leadership, The Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center cultivates, promotes, and preserves traditional and contemporary Chicano, Latino, and Native American arts and culture through multidisciplinary program. Before her current role at the Guadalupe, Ms. Bae was Executive Director of Texas Folklife. That's a statewide organization based in Austin, dedicated to preserving and presenting the diverse culture and living heritage of the Lone Star State. In that position, she grew some very successful statewide programs, including the Big Squeeze Accordion Contest, Festival of Texas Fiddling, and Stories from Deep in the Heart. She's produced several media projects and received several major grants from prestigious national organizations such as the NEA, National Endowment for the Arts. Before her work with Texas Folklife, Bae directed the Narciso Martinez Cultural Arts Center in San Benito in the Rio Grande Valley, where she oversaw the successful building and openings of the San Benito History Museum, the Texas Conjunto Museum Hall of Fame, and the Freddie Fender Museum. I'm tempted to sing Wasted Days and Wasted Night, but I will spare everyone. She was also producer for the Rio Grande Valley Public Radio Station, where she hosted weekly art segments and produced radio documentaries. Bae holds a bachelor's degree from Our Lady of the Lake and is a native of Brownsville, Texas. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you very much.
And last but not least is a colleague of mine at the University of Texas at San Antonio, Stephanie Knoll. She is the Special Collections Librarian there at the University of Texas at San Antonio. In this position, she manages the Mexican Cookbook Collection. That is the largest Mexican cookbook collection of its kind, as well as the rest of the rare book collection and the Special Collections Instruction Program. She's worked in libraries for 9 years and worked in higher ed for 19 years. Her first librarian position was manager of the Texas Labor Archives, where she worked with researchers on the farm workers movement, the 1981 air traffic controller strike, and other vital moments in Texas labor history. Her current position allows Stephanie to work with many passionate individuals, scholars, students, and chefs to preserve the culinary heritage of Mexico, South Texas, and San Antonio. Thank you for joining us, Stephanie. So I'm going to start with Dr. Saldana. Liliana, if we're talking about nuestros antepasados, let's start at the beginning. Where and when did the tamale originate?
So the origin of the tamal has been disputed. While there isn't any evidence that points to a specific region, scholars believe that tamales may have originated in Mesoamerica, which is where maize originates. We know that there are diverse varieties of tamales that have been created throughout the continent, including present-day Mexico, Peru, Chile, Bolivia, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and other regions across the continent where maize continues to be a part of people's diet. We know that Mesoamerican people were eating tamales before they were eating tlaxcalis or tortillas, as the Spaniards called them. In many regions, it was typical to eat masa, mixed or stuffed with another ingredient and wrapped in a leaf and then steamed. This process gradually developed over the centuries through the use of various instruments and cooking techniques. For example, the use of a raspadora de piedra to take the corn off the cobs to make the nixtamal, clay pots or ollas, and pichanchas or tlalchihuihuite, which is a clay pot with small perforations to rinse the nixtamal. It's an important utensil that allows one to strain the necayote or the water with lime, which is used to cook the corn during the nixtamalization process, which is a process that allows our body to digest the corn while increasing its nutritional value. You also need manos and metates to grind the corn and to cook the masa, ollas with lids. So in terms of the techniques, people had to become experts in the nixtamalization process. La molienda, or the grinding process, el amasado, or the kneading process, and la envoltura and concocción, or the wrapping and cooking process. So even with the development of molinos and modern steamers, which is what I use a modern steamer and I do get my masa at a molino, we're still very much relying on the same processes and techniques for making tamales that go back hundreds, if not thousands of years. So not much has changed. We know that the nixtamalization process was used at least 3,000 years ago when the Olmecas were making huge advancements in social organization. In Guatemala, in a place called Salinas de Blanco, archaeologists have found large quantities of tecomates or gourds with lime, an indication that this was used to make nixtamal. Again, we don't know if they were making tamales, but they were definitely making nixtamal. And even though there is relative absence of physical evidence on the consumption of tamales during the pre-Hispanic period, we have iconographic and linguistic evidence that sheds light on the origins. For example, a mural in San Bartolo, Guatemala, that pertains to a late preclassic period depicts a young woman who is carrying tamales in a scene imprinted on a bowl from Caminaljuyu, located in Guatemala and connected to Teotihuacan. We see a person who is offering food, including tamales. So the richest source of knowledge on tamales comes from the Florentine Codex, which was originally called Historia General de las Cosas de Nueva España during the first part of the 16th century. The Florentine Codex documents the various tamales offered by tamal sellers. They offered meat tamales, barbecue tamales, tamales cooked in ollas, tamales cooked in ash. They offered tamales with grains of maize with chile, fish tamales, frog tamales, axolote tamales with grains of maize, mushroom tamales, tuna and cactus tamales. They also sold tamales in different shapes. For example, they sold tamales that were narrow, pointed tamales. They sold fruit tamales, bean tamales, tamales with beans forming a seashell at the top. I'm not sure how that looks like. I tried to make some of those tamales a while back. They also sold spotted tamales, white fruit tamales, and maize flour tamales. So if we look at Mexico alone, each region has different kinds of tamales. There's great diversity, hundreds if not thousands of varieties. It's a popular dish that's an important part of people's diet, consumed during the holidays, posadas, baptismal celebrations. They're also offered as ofrendas for Dia de los Muertos and prepared on February 2nd for El Día de la Candelaria, which symbolizes the end of the Advent and the Catholic liturgical calendar. In some indigenous communities in Mexico, tamales are prepared during these days to celebrate the beginning of the corn planting season. So these are some of the origins on tamales.
Thank you so much, Liliana. One of the themes that when you're talking about all the diverse types of tamales, I think one of the central thing that stays the same is corn, maíz. And that's we know it was the building block of Mesoamerican food. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of corn, not only as a foodstuff, but also as a symbol for Mexicans throughout history?
Yeah, so in the culinary tradition of Mexico and other indigenous communities, corn or maíz is a solid point of departure. For centuries, our people have understood the seasons, the counting of year, the astronomical calendars on the cultivation of corn. So corn is really at the root of our culture. It's foundational to our culture. There is hardly a part of our culture that is not related or has a connection to corn. And even though there is evidence that corn is present across the continent, it has adapted to various climates and flourished in Mesoamerica through a long process of domestication, resulting in what scholars like Roberto Rodriguez calls a civilizational impulse, which means that the planting and the harvesting of maize led to a proliferation of knowledge, mathematical knowledge, philosophical knowledge, cosmological knowledge, architectural knowledge, basically all kinds of knowledge. And this is why Mexican scholars refer to maíz as un empeño milenario y colectivo. In other words, it is the basis of our millenary culture because it led to not only the creation of knowledge, but also led to the creation of various kinds of varieties of corn that is used in our culinary practices. So it's definitely a part of our culinary heritage. It's connected to our love of the land. It's connected to patience to cultivate the land. It's connected to our ancestors. And so for Mexican American people and other indigenous peoples, corn is a part of our identity. It has been around for, our maize-based diet has been around for 7,000 years on this continent. So imagine we've been making all kinds of food with corn, not only tamales, but tlaxcalis or tortillas. Today we see different kinds of food made with corn, from flautas to tortas to tlacoyos, sopes, gorditas, a variety of foods, even totopos or corn chips, tacos. But tamales are definitely one of the foods that is so central to the indigenous and Mexican diet. It's considered to be sacred by indigenous peoples. It is considered to be sacred by Mexican American communities. I think in the video I talk about how my stepfather would make a cross on the masa after he would knead it and prepare it. So I think those are practices that connect us to the sanctity of corn and how corn has really been at the root of our culture, of our identity, and quite literally our sustenance. This is why we call us gente de maíz.
Sure. Thank you, Liliana. I want to talk to our viewers for just a quick second. We are taking questions in the chat on YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube right now, please feel free to present questions on YouTube, and those will be filtered to me to talk to our esteemed panelists. So we depend on your questions, and we would love to answer some if possible. I'm going to transition to Stephanie. You as the rare books librarian at UTSA, you're a steward of the UTSA Mexican Cookbook Collection, which I had said is the largest collection of its kind in the country. And you have I'm jealous, you have you access these gems every day, and you get to work with scholars and chefs every day. And I want to kind of transition and say, from those experiences that you've had, what do you see the differences between some of the recipes that are in some of our 18th, 19th century cookbooks to today? And that can include a lot of different things. So Stephanie, if you'd like to comment on that.
Sure. Well, we can start by talking about the narrative structure of recipes from the 18th and 19th century versus the much more structured, familiar structure of, ingredients, how to prepare, structure that we're used to with recipes now. So a lot of early recipes, they didn't have that. It was more of a paragraph or two about how to make that particular dish. So for instance, I have El Cocinero Mexicano, which is one of the first cookbooks to be, it shares the title of first cookbook published in Mexico with another one from 1831. But so these, you can see they don't have like ingredients list, manner of preparation, oven temperature, things like that. It's really just a narrative of how you prepare this particular dish. Whereas now, most cookbooks are published with the novice in mind. So they have, step-by-step ingredients, and then step-by-step how to prepare them. And then if you look at ingredients, a lot of the ingredients that were used in 18th and 19th century recipes, those are things that, you would have to do a lot of preparation yourself. So you wouldn't necessarily have your nixtamal that, is already ready. You would have to make it yourself. Whereas now, you can buy it in the store. You can buy corn husks in the store. So those are, the ingredients that are present are very different because you can buy a lot of pre-made things now in the store. Knowledge-wise, a lot of 18th and 19th century recipes were meant for people who had already been in the kitchen. So you have to already know how to make nixtamal. They're not going to tell you that in the recipe. And now, again, we write for novices, so we try to include as much preparation information in recipes as possible. And then also technology changed a lot over, several centuries. So you went from having metate to having a food processor, and that's what a lot of people use now. So yeah, there's definitely been a lot of changes to recipes over the last 2 or 3 centuries.
Thank you, Stephanie. Christina, I want to talk to you about, I said earlier that San Antonio has always been a crossroads. That's geographically, the hill country's right here, and we can get to the piney woods in an hour. Politically, the border has moved several times over the last couple centuries, and culturally. And from a cultural perspective is what I want to focus on. Can you discuss the significance of tamales and the tamaladas among Mexican Americans in South Texas? And, also, could you share, your own personal connection to the tamaladas as well?
Sure, of course, Dean. And, the beautiful thing about this program is that, we're starting from the beginning. Liliana shared about the origins, of the tamales, and then Stephanie's bringing it closer, to our time period. And what amazes me is how this living tradition has withstood thousands of years, so many centuries. And we know that here in South Texas, this really is a living tradition. You cannot get by Christmas without having tamales. I mean, you're just going to end up having them somewhere. If you're anywhere in South Texas, you're going to end up, even if you don't eat them at home and you don't buy them, you will end up at some party with tamales. And I think the closer that you get to the border, the more prevalent the tamales are. Down in the Rio Grande Valley, I'm sorry, but at the end of December, we've had enough tamales because they're just at every single party. And we have them every day of the week in December. So, this is just such a part of life, that we don't even, we don't think, oh, this is a cultural tradition. I am living my heritage. We don't. We just do it. We just eat them, without thinking about it. So that just tells you how much alive this tradition is. And I think that's why, one of the reasons why San Antonio is designated as a city of gastronomy, because it is just such a rich living tradition. In terms of the tamales and how you make them, how you obtain the tamales, or there's different ways of doing that. The easiest is to go buy them. And here in any place in South Texas, there's plenty of places where you can find your tamales and purchase them, all the way from the lady next door, your neighbor who still makes them, to small businesses, some of the neighborhood restaurants that make them and sell them, to some of the more medium-sized businesses, that some of them, they're so popular that you have to stand in line for hours, to get them, to even some of the more mass manufactured ones, that are still manufactured here in San Antonio and sold at the grocery stores like at H-E-B. So you have a range of options, of which tamal you want to get, all the way from your own mother's tamal, to purchasing them at H-E-B. You can even order them online. If you want, if you're not in San Antonio. So, but what a lot of people remember is making their tamales at home, right? That's kind of a core part of the experience of having tamales. And many people in South Texas do have the experience of going through a tamalada with their family. And, and it's so common that you might not even call it a tamalada. In my case, growing up on the border, we used to make tamales at least once a year. If we made them several times a year. We didn't call it a tamalada when we got together to make the tamales. We were just making the tamales as we have to. So if we want to have a Christmas party, we have to get together before the Christmas party and make the tamales because it's a very labor-intensive process. Even if we don't make our own masa anymore, we don't make our own nixtamal, even if we just buy it at the molino, it's still a labor-intensive process that benefits from many hands and sharing the time and the space. Some of the common elements of a tamalada are something that they happen around a holiday, usually Christmas. But like Liliana mentioned, there's other holidays around there too, like El Día de la Candelaria, El Día de los Reyes Magos, several other holidays, mostly in the colder seasons. Another common element with tamaladas is there's always a matriarch in charge. It's always going to be usually our grandmas, right? Or somebody's mom, or maybe a tia, but it's usually a matriarch. And usually there's one central matriarch, that's kind of in charge of everything. And there's multiple people helping out, but that matriarch is going to be the one that directs all the traffic and makes all the decisions, usually. The third element is that this has a lot to do with family. It's family that just comes together to help each other out. You're going to come together and celebrate Christmas anyway. So you come together and do this labor-intensive process that is actually skilled. This is skilled labor. You have to, spreading the masa on the tamales has a skill, and you have to learn how to do it. And in this case, usually because this is a multi-generational activity, children begin learning actually very, very young. When they're 6, 7, 8 years old, that's the first step. Next skill that you might learn, you might graduate to the next step, which is putting the meat inside or the filling, whatever filling it's going to be inside the tamal and rolling it up. The next skill you might learn is how to place them, how to stack them, in the pot, in the olla. The next skill that you might graduate to then is steaming, learning how to steam it and how to monitor, the steaming process. Of course, usually it's the matriarch that does the masa, or somebody, it's a specially designated person, and also specially designated people that cook the fillings. We think this is not just a woman's job. Men are involved with this too, especially like I saw the way I saw it in the ranchos, in the farms. The men were the ones that killed, the pig, that slaughtered the pig and prepared it, for cooking. Many times also they'll cook the meats, especially if it's big amounts of meat. So men are involved in some ways too. And then the last element that I'll say about the tamaladas is that, to me, they have a very ordinary, everyday feel to them. It's not a special cultural event. We don't do it necessarily, dressed in our Mexican clothing like I am right now. We do it in jeans and t-shirts and, comfortable clothes because it's messy, it's a messy endeavor, so it's just an ordinary everyday activity. And those are just, some of the common elements. The last thing I'll say about this living tradition is how some of us continue to live it even beyond Christmas and the holidays. My mother will make tamales. Us, her daughters, we haven't learned how to make tamales yet because we still just get them from her. But if I were forced to make tamales by myself here at my house, one day. I bet I could make them. They're not going to be as good as my mom's, but I know what you have to do because I've been around it all my life. But, still, I think a lot of Latino families, Mexican-American families, the moms will still make the tamales. They freeze them in big batches. And then, so then we just steam them, and it is it's a fast food. We do eat it as a fast food. We heat them up real quick, or we toast them in el comal. Those are nice and tasty cuando quedan quemaditos. They have a little burnt, edges. And grandchildren really look forward to eating their grandma's tamales. I notice especially babies, infants, really love to eat tamales, especially the bean tamales. So these are the ways that this is still a living tradition.
Well, thank you, Christina, for that. And I'm sure with your description, some of our viewers are getting hungry. I know I am. And so we'd like to show a video of a cooking demonstration by Liliana Saldana at the Culinary Institute of America. So Ernest, can we see the video?
Hello, buenos dias, good afternoon. My name is Liliana Patricia Saldana, and I'm an associate professor in Mexican American Studies at UTSA. So today we're going to be preparing mushroom tamales and Chile Colorado. This is a vegan take on the traditional tamales that I grew up with. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that you soak the corn husks. This usually takes a few hours. I like to soak the corn husks overnight in hot water. And then in the morning, I do like to add a little bit of warm water just so that they're soft. And this is really important because you don't want your oras or your corn husks to be hard. But as you can see right here, this is probably a little big. I know that the northern Mexico recipes for tamales are a bit smaller than the recipes for tamales in southern Mexico, where the tamales are just a little bit bigger and sometimes they're wrapped in banana leaves. So this is about a good size, or the size that I use and that the women in my family have used over the generations. So after you're done soaking your husks, the next thing you want to do is prepare the Chile Colorado. So the recipe that my mother shared with me and that her mom shared with her is a Chile Guajillo, which is made from the Chile Mirasol, and the Chile Ancho, which is actually the dried and smoked pepper of the Poblanos. So we're going to use 8 anchos, and we're going to use 6 guajillos, 2 cloves of garlic, and half an onion. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is wash the chiles and de-seed them. So this is an important process. So we want to begin by taking the stems off. You can either tear them apart or use a knife. So you know that you have good dried chiles when they look a little transparent, a little reddish. If they're really brittle, they're probably not very good chiles, or they've been over smoked, over dried, or they're probably old. So you want to make sure that they're dry, but they're not brittle. So this is the process to make the Chile Colorado. So the next thing we're going to do is add the garlic. So 2 cloves of garlic, half an onion. We're going to cut the ends off. Okay. So we have everything in here. We're just going to add some water. So as the chiles are cooking, we're going to start kneading the masa. This masa is from Molino La Ideal on Zarzamora and Poplar. So I really like using, or I like going to molinos. One, because you're supporting the smaller businesses, and also because it's going to be freshly ground nixtamal, okay, so, or masa. So we're gonna start kneading it just to soften it up. So the recipe that I use calls for 8 cups of masa. What we're gonna do is add some oil and some salt. I like to use 4 teaspoons of salt. I'll add the other later on. You also want to add a teaspoon or a teaspoon and a half of baking powder to your masa. This is one of my favorite parts of making tamales, is kneading the masa. And of course, it gets softer when you add the chile sauce. And you can also add about half a cup of broth. You know, if you're making pork tamales, you can add half a cup of the broth from the pork. You can add vegetable broth, or you can use some of the broth from the chiles, which is what I do. And we're gonna add some oil as well. So this is 8 cups of masa. So I come from a family of diabetics, so I don't like to use pork lard, even if it's the less processed pork lard. So I'm using avocado oil. I've used a cup. The oil is really important whether you use pork lard or olive oil, coconut oil, because this is what's going to keep the masa from not sticking to the husk. Okay, so sometimes if we don't add enough oil, your corn is gonna stay stuck to the husk. Okay, so remember, 8 cups of masa for this recipe, 1 cup of oil, 4 teaspoons of salt, and 1 to 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. I'm always amazed at the practice of making tamales. I think of my mother who taught me how to make tamales, and she taught everyone in our family how to make tamales, from the old ones to the little ones. So the chiles are cooked. We're going to start putting them in the blender. So remember, it's half an onion, 8 chile anchos, 2 garlic cloves, and 6 guajillos. And you do want to add some salt. Where's the salt? I was looking for the salt. I would say a teaspoon. And we're gonna add just a little bit of that broth in here. Oh, there's still a chile in there. It's hot, so you want to make sure that you don't burn yourself. Okay, so remember, a spoonful. We'll play with that for a while. And corn absorbs a lot of water. Masa absorbs a lot of liquids. Okay, so for this recipe, I like to add about half a cup of broth. So you'll notice that the texture is changing. You want to keep kneading. You want it to be this consistency, okay? Or else you're gonna have a very hard time spreading the masa on the husk. So the final product should feel soft. You don't want it to feel hard. You can add a little bit more broth. If you're using vegetable broth, if you want to use the chile broth, that'll be good. to keep the masa moist. Okay, so this is our masa. I remember growing up, my stepfather or my mom would make the masa, my stepfather would make the masa, and he would always put a cross on the masa. I wonder if that is some sort of indigenous practice that sort of just stayed over the generations, right? You honor all the four elements of the earth that have created corn and all the foods that go into the making of corn. So I always think of that, the four elements. Okay, so next we're going to work on the filling. I'm making a mushroom filling instead of the carne de puerco or the pork meat. I love the texture of the mushrooms. They have sort of a nice meatiness to them. I've used just baby portobellas and the white button mushrooms. I've made I've made vegan tamales with butternut squash and rajas, beans. This is a new recipe for me, and I'm very happy to share it, and I hope you try it too. I think you will be impressed with the flavor, especially as you saute the mushrooms with the oil and the onions and the garlic. You'll saute them for a few minutes. You don't want them to get too browned. And once you saute them, you want to add some of this Chile Colorado, right? And some of the broth. Remember that the mushrooms are going to release water. So that's when you want to add the Chile Colorado. And I added about 3 spoonfuls of that chile onto the saucepan, onto the pan. So this is what your mushrooms are going to look like once they've been sauteed and once you've cooked them in the Chile Colorado for a few minutes. So I like to cover the mushrooms with the Chile Colorado for about maybe 10 to 15 minutes, and they'll be ready to be used for your filling. So in my family, spreading the masa on the corn husk, or embarrando, is, I think, one of my most favorite parts because everybody gets involved in this process, right? The primos, the primas, the young ones, the older ones. So, and it goes by fast. The more helpers you have in this process, the faster it is and the sooner you'll be able to eat your tamales. So we want to just use a little bit of this filling. You see that right there? And then you want to close it, and then you want to fold the corn husk, okay? You don't want to put too much of the filling, it just depends on the size of the husk, right? Or also it'll start to spill out. So this is kind of a medium-sized pot. When we get together for Christmas, we make dozens and dozens and dozens of tamales. So we have this huge olla. But this is definitely the smallest I have. You want to fill the bottom part of your steamer with water first, and you want to let the water steam. And this is really critical for your tamal making, okay? Once it starts to steam, you want to add some hojas at the bottom. The hojas that were too small, you don't want to throw those away. You want to use those at the bottom of the steamer, of the lid. So you just want to line that bottom part. We're going to start stacking the tamales. I like to stack them standing up. Okay, so once you have all your tamales in here, you want to add another layer of hojas, and you want to cover the tamales. Okay, and now they're ready to cook for 45 minutes to about an hour. So you want to make sure that you time the tamales. At least that helps me. And the other thing that my mom does is she puts a towel over. Okay, let me use this towel. She uses a towel to cover the pot, and then she adds the lid. Okay? And you can also wet the towel, which is what I do, before I start steaming them, and then I steam them for about 45 minutes. So you want to check them at the 45-minute mark. If the masa is still uncooked, you want to leave them on high. Okay, so that's really critical. You want to cook your tamales on high for 45 minutes. to 4 to 5 minutes. You want to check them. You want to check one, and you want to see if they're ready. Now, when you get your tamales, you'll notice, right, after 45 minutes that the masa might be really soft and it might even look uncooked. So you want to let them cool, okay? So if you want to see if they're cooked, you just get one out, take one out. So they're going to be hot, so you want to make sure that you put them, or you get at least one on a plate. You want to let it sit for about 10 minutes, and then you want to check, okay? So after 10 minutes, you want to open the husk, you want to open the tamal, and you can see here that it is ready to be eaten, okay? So thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you try this wonderful recipe. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that demo, Dr. Saldana. I think the question in everybody's mind is when are we invited over for dinner? I want to, the first time that I knew that you were such a great cook, Dr. Saldana, was on Facebook. And, I had told my wife that the dish that you made could be mistaken for a dish at Pujol in Mexico City, the highest end of highest end. Your dishes are so beautifully constructed and healthy. Can you talk about what led you down this road? You're an academic, and why cooking?
So, cooking has always been a part of, my family tradition. My grandmother was an exceptional cook. My mother is a great cook. And I think a few years ago, as I was thinking more about my health and my family's struggles with diabetes, I started thinking about shifting my diet to a plant-based diet. And so I became a vegetarian about 5 years ago, although I had started to shift to a plant-based diet, I think, a few earlier years before. And so I think I was mostly inspired to adopt a plant-based diet to learn about Mexican and Mesoamerican gastronomy, specifically those plant-based recipes, because of my family's history with diabetes. So as long as I can remember, I was raised by my grandmother. She had diabetes. I mean, as far as I can remember, she was diabetic the whole entire time that she raised me. And she died from complications of diabetes. My mother has been living with diabetes for more than almost 30 years. My uncle passed away from complications of diabetes. And so I know that coming from a family where diabetes has been so prevalent, I wanted to, take measures to learn about these sort of ancestral foods. And for me, learning about these ancestral recipes is a way of not just self-care, but it's literally going to be, I think, the difference for me between, living a quality life and not living a quality life. And so that's one of the reasons that I became plant-based, and I began to learn about the different foods, the different kinds of recipes. I've learned how to adapt some of my family's recipes because I grew up with, mole, chicken mole. I grew up with calabacita con carne de puerco or pork meat. I grew up with pork tamales. I grew up with menudo, pozole. So these are the foods that I grew up with, and I don't think that I need to stop eating those foods, right, to be healthy. So I have reclaimed the ancestral recipes.
Thank you so much. That's a great answer. And it does get to some of the core values of the UNESCO Creative City of Gastronomy, that sustainability piece, and not only sustainable for our communities, but sustainable for us as individuals. Thank you, Dr. Saldana. Christina, we're down to 10 minutes. I wanted to ask you about what the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center and other locations will be doing for the Tamal Institute going forward. Can you talk about the programming and how our viewers can get involved in that programming?
Sure. The Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center is doing is collaborating with the World Heritage Office in a series of Tamal Institute programs. Previous years, what we did is we started the Tamal Institute as part of La Gran Tamalada, which was an instructional program at the Guadalupe Theater for many years. That was launched by Drs. Carmen Tafoya and Ellen Riojas Clark when they published their book on tamales. So kind of as when they published their book, they did a demo presentation, and that grew into a regular program every year at the Guadalupe, which then La Familia Cortez helped produce as well and helped present. We outgrew the space at the Guadalupe Theater. I mean, we had close to 600 people packed in that theater, and that was more than we should have had in there. So that went over to Market Square. And now, with the World Heritage Office helped create the Tamal Institute, which seeks to go further into the tradition of tamales, go deeper and study the diversity and the effect in a much deeper way. And this year, because of the pandemic, this is being split up into several programs managed by the World Heritage Office. I also want to encourage everybody just to go to the websites of the cultural institutions in San Antonio, like the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center, the Creative Cities of Gastronomy website that you mentioned earlier, the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center with Liliana there. They do lots of programmings on cooking, and some of the other cultural centers in town include Centro Cultural Aslan and American Indians in Texas, which have lots of very good culinary programs.
Thank you, Christina. Stephanie, again, when you're in the archives and we've seen a lot and talked a lot about a lot of different tamal recipes, what are some of your favorites as you've helped scholars and chefs?
Well, the one that comes to mind is an 1890 recipe for curd tamales. Wow. So tamales stuffed with cheese curds, which sounds amazing and delicious. So that's one that definitely comes to my mind immediately. There's also, if you're ever looking for a sweet tamal recipe, 19th century recipes are their way to go because, oh my gosh, almost every single one of them has sugar in it. And they have lots of recipes with raisins, cinnamon, almonds, nuts, citron, anise. So yeah, that one is, sweet tamales, you have a lot to choose from in terms of like the 19th century recipes. There's also a manuscript cookbook that we have digitized from 1884. It was written by this woman, Guadalupe Perez. She lived in Acatzingo, Puebla. And her recipe for tamales, the filling includes rice soaked in milk, and then also ground almonds, egg yolk, sugar, cinnamon, and orange leaf. Yeah,
sounds rich.
Yeah, sounds a lot of the 19th century recipes are very rich.
Yeah. And Stephanie, how can the general public, are they able to access the Mexican cookbook collection at UTSA?
Yes. So while we are currently, our reading room is closed to the public, we do have we have 56 of our cookbooks digitized. So those are available at digital.utsa.edu. in our digital collections. So you can just, there should be a link for Mexican cookbooks on our site, but you can also just do a search for Mexican cooking and it should bring up all 56 of our cookbooks. The majority of those are handwritten, by the way, so be prepared for some cursive.
So they're passed down from family to family member to family member.
Yes, and some of our handwritten recipe books are, we have, like, they're multi-generational. So we'll have one book that passes through multiple generations in one family. We also have several sets of books that are multi-generational. So the Volante family, we have several books by them. Most of them are by Hortensia, but we also have some from her daughters. And yeah, so it's a rich trove of delicious recipes.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. And I did want to get to some of the questions as we have 5 minutes left. One of the questions that came in through chat was, one of our viewers said that they recently had a tamale with an edible wrapper, specifically a tamal that was wrapped in chaya leaf. I was wondering if this is a modern take of what we usually see. And Liliana, did you were talking about chaya earlier?
Yes, I've seen tamales made with chaya, so like chopped into very small pieces and mixed in the masa. I've never seen tamales wrapped in chaya, but I think that that's probably maybe typical in the Yucatan area, which is where chaya is from.
Okay. And another one that I'm going to direct to you, Liliana, is when you were talking earlier in the program, you were talking about totopos. And the question is, I don't know if you know the answer, but the historical origin of totopos, or are they a modern invention?
You know what? I'm not really sure. I know that they're called totopos, like, the tortilla chips, but that's a great question. I need to look into that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone, for your questions. As we're wrapping up, I wanted to ask everyone, where do you like to get tamales and why? So I'll start with Christina.
My mom and my grandma.
Sure. And what kind of tamales do they make? Puerco?
Pork, pork and pollo, chicken, because especially the pork from the Mexican side, we can't cross it over. We can't bring it. So usually now, they'll make 2 batches. They'll make the big batch of pork that we have that night for Christmas there. But then we make another batch of chicken that we can cross back to the U.S. This is the experience in the border. But they also, my aunts all like to experiment, with rajas de chile, and queso, and even the sweet ones. They do and it's really my aunts, not my grandmother, but her daughters that like to experiment with different types.
And Stephanie, what about you? You're a recent transplant to San Antonio. What have you found? Where's your favorite tamales in San Antonio?
So last Christmas, I got my tamales from Delicious Tamales because that was what several people had recommended to me. And they also had vegetarian, which was, I'm vegetarian, so that's always something that I'm looking for when I'm looking for a good tamal place. And they also had dessert tamales, which is another thing that I'm always looking for when I look for a good tamal place. So I brought all those back to Georgia for Christmas, and my family was just over the moon.
That's awesome. And Liliana, I mean, I already know your answer. It's you just make your favorite tamales whenever you want, but where else do you like to get tamales?
We usually make our tamales, and we make so many that we don't really buy them at a place, but I have tried tamales because, as Christina mentioned, like in the past, you go to any office party or any school and there's going to be tamales. So there's some really great places where you can get really, really delicious tamales. So, but yes, also because I'm vegetarian, it's really hard to find tamales, where you can buy tamales. So I just end up making them.
And I'm going to give a plug to a small business that I love on South Florida. It's Tamale Boy. The gentleman there who runs that has just got the best personality, and the tamales are delicious. As we close, I want to thank our panelists. Thank you so much for lending your expertise to this presentation. I think I've learned a ton, and I'm sure our viewers have as well. I also want to give thanks to Ernest Hernandez from UTSA, Gerard Bustos, Lara Serrano, and Colleen Swain at the World Heritage Office. Thank you guys so much for the production of this presentation. I'm looking forward to more programming. And then I think you always have to give credit to where it started. And I want to tell Ellen and Carmen, see what you've created? Keep doing what you're doing, girl. And everybody vote.
Yes.
See you later, San Antonio. And have a great day with wonderful fall weather. Thank you. Adios.
Bye-bye.
Bye.